Hello, everybody. I am your host, Pokeanalytic, and welcome to the show. Here I cover singles and double battles, VGC tournaments, and going over Pokemon news and leaks. So strap in your earbuds, just relax and listen to some Pokemon. I am finally back. It has been so long since I've been back. I was really sick and then I got incredibly busy, so I wasn't able to push out content, but now I am back. And we just have some incredible news over the past weekend. We got the Pokemon Direct, which I'll be covering soon, going over the news and everything like that. We had a VGC tournament just happened this weekend, which I'll also be covering in an updating video. But the crazy thing that I wanted to talk about today is something that could change, not change, but like be marked down in the history books of competitive Pokemon. Miraidon is in a suspect test. Not in anything not in almost any ability, not in 1v1, in Ubers. Actual Ubers, it's going to be tested. If Miraidon gets banned to Anything Goes, this will be the second Pokemon banned to Anything Goes that is not a different form. Because in Generation 8, both Zacians were banned to Anything Goes, but they were both Zacians. They both had the same move pools, mostly. They both had the same ability. They both had the same typing, mostly. But they were basically different forms of the Pokemon. But if Miraidon gets banned, then that will be the first time in Pokemon history where two Pokemon are banned to Anything Goes, with Miraidon and Calyrex Shadow. And I was wondering if Miraidon was going to get banned at the beginning of the generation because of how stupidly strong it is. Like, Miraidon's ability is what makes it over the board. Like, being able to have it set up electric terrain is already good in of its own, but then it gets like a 1.333 times boost to its special attack. It's just absurd. That's basically giving it a life orb, and then you get a choice, and then you get like a choice specs on top of that if you put choice specs on it, which most people would. And it's blazing fast. 135 is just so fast. Only a handful of Pokemon can actually outspeed it. Most importantly, though, is Deoxys forms and Zacian. Zacian can be a counter to Miraidon if Miraidon isn't running a Scarf, but you most likely wouldn't be running a Scarf. But Zacian, and especially the Deoxys forms, they can't switch in. They cannot switch in to an Electro Drift. That's the one thing that I think makes Miraidon already broken. It's already good, but Electro Drift is absurdly good. Electro Drift deals 1.33 times damage with super effective hits. It's 100 base power and 100% accuracy. In the electric terrain, it's a 135 move with 100% accuracy, and it doesn't have any drawbacks. It's stronger than Draco Meteor, and with Draco Meteor you can miss 10% of the time, and it lowers the special attack by 2. But Electro Drift has no drawbacks whatsoever. I mean, sure, it's an electric type, so that means you can't really do anything against ground types, but Miraidon's perfectly fine with that. It will take that drawback as well. And especially with the Tapus not coming back to Scarlet and Violet, that means if you want to switch to terrain outside of electric terrain, you either have to use Rillaboom, and Rillaboom is sort of okay in Ubers. It has a somewhat positive matchup against the metagame. It does well against Kyogre, it does well against Groudon, it does well against Iron Bundle, Palafin, all these water and ground types, but I can't really do much to Miraidon, and especially since Miraidon gets Overheat and U-Turn, which we'll talk about later, Rillaboom doesn't really want to go against Miraidon. And then the other one is Wheezing, which, because of its low special defense, it will just get obliterated by Electro Drift anyway. And now I want to talk about Miraidon's moveset. The moveset is nuts. Electro Drift and Drago Meteor are the standards, and then you have Overheat. Overheat is just what it's just so good on an electric type because Overheat can help deal with the grass types that would resist the electric moves. And then with Iron Treads seem to be a great counter to Miraidon. Because of its ground to steel typing, that means that it can deal super effective damage with Earthquake. It would be immune to Electro Drift and resist the Draco Meteor. And especially since a lot of Iron Treads like to run the Assault Vest, it seems like Iron Treads was practically made for Miraidon. Especially since Iron Treads gets Quark Drive, so that means it would get boosted by Miraidon setting up the electric terrain. So it seems like Iron Treads would have been a counter, but then they gave it Overheat, and yeah, there goes your answer. Especially if Miraidon is running like a choice specs, like yeah, Iron Treads does not really want to switch into that as well. Really, the only checks it has are Pokemon outside of Ubers, except for one, which we'll talk about later. We already covered Zacian, but unless you're running a Scarf Pokemon, really the only two Pokemon that can handle Miraidon is Clodsire and Teen Lu. Clodsire because it's basically Blissey, except it's a ground type and it's not weak to Overheat. It can take the Draco Meteors really well, especially if it has like especially if it is running like a leftover set, like, or a black sludge set, whichever you want. Miraidon doesn't really want to do anything against that. And Teen Lu, another ground type, has an ability called Vessel of Ruins, which lowers the Pokemon special attack stat by like 0.75. Active Pokemon without this ability have their special attack multiplied by 0.75. So that means Miraidon's special attack would be going down. And Teen Lu has an okay special defense. I mean, it's 80, but with that 155 HP, it's doing pretty well, and especially paired with that, ability, and Stomping Tantrum can hurt Miraidon. Going back to Clodsire, it can Toxic Miraidon and then just stall it out, especially since Clodsire has Earthquake as well. They both have Earthquake. What am I saying? Teen Lu and Clodsire both have Earthquake, so it can do some. It can probably 2 or 3 hit KO Miraidon, and especially with Clodsire Toxic and the leftover set, it can wall up Miraidon. But the problem is that if a Pokemon gets countered by Pokemon outside of a tier, that can be a problem. Because when you're building an Uber's team, you want to use Uber Pokemon. Because like Teen Lu would be good against Miraidon, but it wouldn't be good against like Kyogre or Caridon, for example. Teen Lu would be good against Miraidon and a few other things, but then it would be almost useless another chance. Another counter is Iron Bundle, sort of. A 252 special attack, Never Melt Ice, Iron Bundle, Ice Beam, with Miraidon that doesn't really have any bulk investments. It's only a 37.5% chance to OHKO outside of a crit. Well, Miraidon would obviously blow past it because of Iron Bundle's water typing and very, very, very low special defense. So you kind of basically are forced to run a Focus Sash, which means you can't really like switch in. Iron Bundle can kill Miraidon with a choice specs. So it does have a count. So like I said, Miraidon does have counters with Zacian outspeeding and doing super effective damage, Iron Bundle outspeeding and doing super effective damage as well, and Clodsire and Teen Lu walling it out. And unless it's a Scarf or Deoxys, there aren't really any other Pokemon that could handle it. Gliscor is a ground type, but has a really low special defense stat. So it can get one shot by Draco Meteor, especially if you're running that choice specs. Arceus can be useful. It really, really depends on how you EV it. And so it can be a counter to Miraidon. But there's one move that I wanted to talk about, and that is, for some reason, they gave Miraidon U-turn. Why on earth give this thing U-turn? Like if it just had Volt Switch, that would be fine because that means it couldn't switch out against ground Pokemon unless it did it manually. But why give it U-turn? Because if it is against that Arceus, if it is against that Teen Lure Clodsire, or if it is against the Gliscor, if you somehow found a way to beat it 1v1, because Miraidon is just so fast, it can just U-turn out and go into a better Pokemon for the matchup. Unless Miraidon is really the last Pokemon, it could just switch out and come back in. Now you may say, what if you have like a bunch of spikes down? Or even Stealth Rock. Well, don't give Miraidon the choice specs. It does enough damage as it is, and just give it heavy duty boots so then it can just switch in and out as much as it wants. In my opinion, I think Miraidon should get banned to anything goes. There aren't really enough counters to Miraidon because right now there are only really 4 Pokemon that in Ubers that can handle Miraidon, and only one of them can actually switch into Miraidon, because the actual definition of a counter in Smogon definitions is it has to switch in, tank the attack, and deal with it. Only 3 Pokemon can actually do that: Arceus, Ground, Teen Lu, and Clodsire. Only one of them is Ubers. Not to mention, if you give Miraidon a Terra Electric. If you give Miraidon Terra Electric, it does absurd damage with Electro Drift. If you do not resist it, then Terra Electric Electro Drift does absurd damage. It's kind of like Kyogre with a Terra Water Spout in the rain. It just does absurd damage. The only thing that keeps Kyogre in check is it has 90 speed, which makes it you have to basically force it to use a Scarf, and that in itself can be a hindrance. You can play around Kyogre with a choice Scarf, but Miraidon has a 135 speed. Like, it is blazing fast. It doesn't need the Scarf. You can run Life Orb, you can run heavy duty boots, you can run choice specs, and then just do absurd damage. In my opinion, Miraidon should get banned to anything goes. And I actually had this thought at the beginning of the generation when I was doing calculations for a restricted format, because I find it fun to do calculations. I found that Miraidon does just absurd damage with the choice specs. Because like with Miraidon being able to Terra Electric and just doing absurd damage, with Miraidon's blazing speed, with Miraidon having a good move pool, especially U-turn, being able to switch out and then come back in when the matchup is favorable. Miraidon just has a lot going for it. They did talk about Koraidon also getting banned to anything goes, which in itself would be a nightmare, which in itself would be crazy. Which would also go down into Pokemon history, but that's another video for another day if they decide to talk about it. They also gave Miraidon Flash Cannon for Fairy types and Dazzling Gleam for opposing Dragon types. If you want to go Terra Fairy, Dazzling Gleam, because sure, just give it everything that it wants. Yeah, so in my opinion, Miraidon should get banned to anything goes. I don't know why I just don't know what they were really thinking when it comes to Miraidon, because that's what they've done. They've always liked to make super absurd Pokemon. In Generation 6 and 7, it was Mega Rayquaza and Ultra Necrozma in Generation 7. In Generation 8, it was Zacian. And now in Generation 9, we have Miraidon and potentially Koraidon. And speaking about Miraidon as well, if you go to the stats that it's always being used, it has never dropped below bottom 5. It is usually either been number 1 or number 2. Number 1 is usually Koraidon. Just recently, for the February usage stats, it was number 2. And then in January, it was again number 2. And also in December, it was again number 2. It does not really just drop down from number 2. Maybe like a year ago, it could have dropped down from number 2, but Right now, with all the Pokemon coming out, it is number 2. This Pokemon is strong. This Pokemon is fast. This Pokemon just does whatever it wants to do. So I agree that Miraidon should get banned to Anything Goes. And if it does, we've made Pokemon history of 2 Pokemon that are not forms are banned to Anything Goes. Sorry. Because in Generation 4, Arceus was banned to Anything Goes. And of course, Arceus would have every type. So right now, Generation 4 has the most Anything Goes Pokemon. But because they're all different forms, then it's technically just one Pokemon. And then in Generation 6 and 7, it was only Mega Rayquaza. Generation 8, it was both Zacians. Again, same Pokemon, different forms. But now with Generation 9, we could have 2 Anything Goes Pokemon for the first time in Pokemon history. But I want to thank everyone for watching, and let me know what you think about Miraidon. What would you do to Miraidon to nerf it in potential generations? And do you think Miraidon should get banned to Anything Goes? And do you think that a Pokemon could counter Miraidon that I've not mentioned? But definitely let me know, and stay tuned for the next one.